That loop of existence, that E-loop, is where we are. In every moment, we have a choice as to whether it's going to be natural functioning or I functioning dominated. Every moment, we have a choice. What happens if our I system is resting, that basically we resonate. We resonate with everything in existence. We resonate with a grain of sand on the Pacific coast. We resonate with the child that's crying and bombed and burning in Syria. We don't look at systems from the outside. It isn't a microsystem, a mesosystem that we look at, that we analyze. With MBB, we are part of that system. And there's always, the way it's been looked at up to now, is that there's a subject and an object. Yes, we can look at things dualistically, but with MBB, we have a new lens to look at ourselves in the universe from the beginningless beginning to the endless end. And we have a choice of how that central control is. We can input into that central control. We have a choice whether we flow into the universe, whether we resonate with the universe, or whether we're isolated. And I was thinking about the music that Derek was playing, and I'm not very musically inclined. In fact, I remember in elementary school, they would test out all the kids. And do, re, mi. And they would put them in, well, you're an alto, you're a soprano. And they came to me, and I went do, re, mi, as best I could. And she said, move your lips. Move your lips. I wasn't supposed to sing. Okay, so, it was easy for me because I didn't have to memorize anything. I didn't have to know the songs or anything. But so, what does music do? So, as I was listening to the music, that I felt a connection with rhythm, a connection with completeness, a connection with simplicity, connection with full spectrum, a connection with laughter. It didn't make any difference. But how about the adolescents today that listen to music 24/7? What are they doing? What is that loop doing? Is it just sort of isolating themselves? Music doesn't automatically connect you any more than art or poetry connects you. That we have to look at what is the effect. For instance, little kids, you see they have a toy and they play with it and they play with it for hours, and we think, well, they get bored. Well, basically each moment they experience the joy, the universality, they're feeling that toy. But then you have another kid with obsessive compulsive disease. He takes a toy, he doesn't feel anything, but he's driven to move it around. So we look at the central control and what is it doing? Is it isolating us on, while I'm enjoying the music? Isn't this a wow? There's no world out there. There's no connectivity. So the model, which we're all involved in developing, And the model is in its infancy. Where it goes, it could go into the sewers, or it could go into the heavens. It's up to you folks. But looking at it, this is an E loop, the central control, the trees, the dogs, the cats, the wildlife, the grains of sand, the water molecules. That's all given. But we have a choice. Okay? We can resonate or we can be isolated. We can be connected or we can be disconnected, off and on. And because of that gift, we have the default mode network, the psychosocial network. That is the message that is most important with this ball. That with this ball, it can be like Blake's looking at a grain of sand or looking at a sunflower. You see. The model has that power, just as a grain of sand has that particular power. So, do we have any questions about the model? You can see the two-loop diagram here because we have a choice. There's a central control. That's where we enter. You could see the depressor and fixer. You can, it's all there. It's so simple. Okay. Is there any questions about the ball, the model, central control, the E loops, and the C loops? Okay? Great. So, do we have any questions on technique, what we do clinically, what we don't do clinically, about MBB interventions, about difficult to treat clients? Do we have any clinical type questions on how we use it in any of the spheres? But why don't we start with, the base, when we're working with a client. Do we have any questions, any thoughts, any difficult patients, any difficult clients that you've had, clients which, good, it doesn't work with?
Yeah, okay. My question was, is this thing on? Yeah. My question was, if there's a group, and let's say, and we're going to use this, all right? So, first of all, everybody expresses their opinion, like we did here, right? And then then we're trying to get out of the I system and trying to drop into the net, right?
Okay.
Am I correct?
Okay, so you're talking about a group therapy or a group that has come together for a specific purpose, a social group?
No, I'm talking about like a group that would come together for a specific purpose, like, let's say it'd be a city council or something like that.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
One of the meso groups, great, mesospheres, yep.
Okay, and let's say there's one person in that group, and they go like, I know I work better when I feel like this,
Uh-huh.
So does that kind of destroy the MBB?
Okay, so your question is, first of all, for a group, we're talking about a city council type of group. One, the group would need to be open that they want to change, okay? There needs to be some dysfunction. There needs to be some problem, some issue that they're not able to solve. It doesn't have to do with a particular individual. As we're talking about the function of the group, and your function of the city council is to make sure that the city is taken care of, that the services are appropriately, that it's distributed equally and appropriately. So basically, it doesn't have to do with what an individual is, but what that group wants to be, okay, what it wants to do. And if it's everyone is happy, everyone in the city's happy, fine. If there's difficulties, if there's issues that can't be resolved, the group decides they want MBB, then it doesn't make any difference what the individual, that basically the group gets together. You have a facilitator who's trained in MBB, just as Kevin is trained, and he lets the heat rise. The more the heat rises, the better the outcome is. Because as you saw with a group that Kevin conducted this morning, that he wanted the heat to bubble up. And it was very, very clear that there was eye system functioning. It isn't what an individual particle does. It doesn't make any difference what the individual particle does in a tank of gas. It doesn't make any difference what it bumps into. The overall temperature of the group, emotional climate of the group, functioning of the group, that is what we're concerned about. So it has no relevancy about the individual eye systems. In fact, I have done collective MBB work with people that do not have an MBB practice, that they know nothing about individual MBB. You just go fresh into this virgin group, no one knows anything about it, and you just start doing the maps. But the purpose of the first map is to really focus, let the friction, let the heat, let the dysfunction be there. Okay? Then we move on to the second map, is what is preventing natural functioning, what is preventing a resolution, okay? And then you direct people, if this is still part of the first issue, then you direct them back to, hey, as Kevin beautifully did, hey, this is the first map. And then you just see that basically that the heat starts to lower, you see. It becomes closer to room temperature. That the first, you get all sorts of heat and not a heck of a lot of light. And what is the definition of light? Accomplishing the task at hand. So you have a task that's difficult. Should money go in this district or this district, this part or that part? So you have to have something that people are budding. Doesn't make any difference what the individuals are doing or not doing. You have someone who's uncompromising, so be it. You have people that are compromising, so be it. But the process is powerful enough. Here, Kevin, he didn't know what was going to happen, you see? That when we do a second map, we don't know what's going to happen, but somehow we have sort of a trust in MBB because we're connected to the source. And no matter what the outcome is, we can always say, hey, this is eye system functioning or natural functioning. Don, I remember he did a class, and there were some observers from, I think it was Washington there, and there was this one client who was refractory on the second map. No, this is no good, this is terrible, and they're the guy from Washington, Can you imagine we do a second map, this guy is complaining and saying it's no good, and he'll do this. He says, I'm going to mow my grass no matter what happens. He says, even if I only have one leg, I'm going to mow my grass. He just goes on and on. So what did Don do? He just pointed out that Wow, isn't this a great example of eye system functioning? What a perfect example it is. You see? We're free. We're open. We're not saying, hey, this has to happen. So you bring it together. You do the second map, what is preventing a resolution, or what is preventing natural functioning, and then people start, you can see this, they're working together, they're looking at the unit. They're together to accomplish a purpose. They're starting to have a simultaneous identification with themselves and the group functioning at that particular moment. And then the third map, their natural functioning. And the natural functioning may be that the whole group figures out that this one individual doesn't belong there. I don't know what the natural functioning is. And the outcome, I don't know. And I'm not concerned about, because, the power of that group, like the power of Kevin's group this morning wasn't Kevin's group, it was our group. It was a group that belongs to the universe. I just referred to it so we'll know what we're talking about. So you could see how much that group could accomplish. How much could that group accomplish in an hour? And how much could the second group accomplish in an hour? How much could the third group accomplish in 10 minutes? That the power goes up exponentially. The power of people naturally functioning, connecting to the net is absolutely unbelievable. It's a wave. I refer to it as a wave because it does have the power of a wave. And it just is astounding, as astounding to the aha experience that hopefully most of us have or will have when we do a second map. Wow! I will heal better on this map. I do have this wisdom, and I just feel different about myself. When I feel the feet on the ground, I just feel different. I feel grounded. I feel I belong. And it's the same, but much more powerful with the group. Can you imagine all the energy, all the talent, all the wisdom that's wasted in groups in this universe? I mean, it's crazy. I mean, if you just look at with that first group, this is going on in Washington. It's going on everywhere around the world. No wonder. There's that curve. It's really, and that power of what we're doing to each other, the inequality that basically it can snowball in a positive direction that's unbelievable. So the meso work and the macro work in terms of dealing with decisions about healthcare, peace, distribution of income. There's just so many issues that we're able to look at with this simple model that we can put on a ball that hopefully a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old can sort of understand. There's you, and there's this little girl down the road, and she's black. You see, you're white, but you're all connected. You see, that the connection is number one. You see, people talk about, oh yeah, there's all oneness. You see, that's a concept. But what we're looking at is we're looking at it from the inside out, we're looking at it from the outside in. We're looking at it, we're teaching, our education system is corrupted by the I system. And it's not the environment changes the I system. That's not the way it is. The I system is just manifested in the environment. Okay? That the environment is just a manifestation of what? I system functioning, individual, collective, social, and the like. So I could preach even more, but questions? Well, let's go over here. Yeah.
I was just curious, Stan. I read in Come to Your Senses that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the idea of the identity system kind of came while you were sitting in your living room listening to the sound of a refrigerator compressor turning off and on. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I was just curious how you came to the net of reality. How did that model come to you?
Okay. So, sometimes people come to me and say, hey, Stan, you must have a very little I system. Well, the opposite is the truth. If it was little, I never would have found it. It was humongous. And Carolyn can document that, but we don't have enough time because it could be hours and hours and hours of documenting about my I system, okay? So every human being has an I system. I had one that was gross. It was really big, you see. And that's why I was able to come across it. And I just, that experience of seeing that my self-centered thoughts would turn off my ears. And you see, when you're driving on the road, it's just obvious. It just puts blinders on you. But I gave up the active practice of medicine in 1994 and spent full time on this particular issue, knowing that we're all connected to a source of healing, goodness, wisdom, and power. And that source was really the net. It wasn't clear at that point, but it took Carol and I 4 or 5 years of time to really characterize what this hindrance, what this obstacle, what this veil was, so it could be simple enough and useful enough for use in any sphere that we want it to be. And initially we focused on pain patients in Maine. And these patients were so pain-ridden, and it wasn't up in their heads, but they were broken down physically, that some of them had doses of methadone of 1 gram. And no physician would describe it except addictionologists. And they couldn't even sit still in the group. And the bridging practices had a very positive effect. It was sort of coincidental. Carol and I just felt this was a gift, and we were going to use it. And another physician who was addictionologist, had pain patients. It worked. Then we did some work in Zen Center. People invited us to do some work. We're in Salt Lake City. We then invited to go to some clinics to work, and then Joe, and then the VA, and then it sort of spread, and people wanted to do research on it. So it sort of just grew. But it's like Benjamin Franklin said, that when he apologized, when he wrote this long letter to a friend, at the end he says, P.S., sorry I didn't have time to write a short letter. You see? That basically to characterize how it worked, and obviously, you know, the gifts I was given working on systems theory. I've been working on systems theory before systems theory became systems theory, that non-linear systems, you know, 60, 70 years ago, I was developing interest in. So I was able to really simplify it into something like the two-loop diagram. But it wasn't that I was struck with lightning. It was like you're in Seattle and it's foggy and you're out there for hours and hours and eventually you get damp a little bit, you see. There wasn't any lightning strikes. It was just sort of a gradual process. I was a very slow learner, you see. But I was always never satisfied until I could develop something that others could use, you see. I wasn't concerned about getting to the top of the mountain. That had no interest in me. I mean, we're all connected, I knew that, my marrow, my bone, but how come I kept slipping down? The more I fell down, the more I slipped down, the more it became clear what was doing it, and clarified the concept of requirement. So I said every time I became tense, every time I became anxious, every time I became self-centered, every time I became withdrawn, every time I become irritated, hey, you know, there's a requirement of how I should be and how the world should be, you see. I was second-guessing the Creator. I mean, the Creator's talking to us each moment, you see. Someone said, hey, you know, God's talking to me on the second map. I don't know anything about that, but each moment we have our existence is God's, you know, calling to you as I would experience it. So each moment that my eye system was second guessing, you know, people shouldn't badmouth mind-body bridging. People shouldn't. They should be kind, you know, or I shouldn't make mistakes, or I should smile more, or I should be more friendly, or I should be more outgoing. So I saw that all these requirements. So basically, it was a slow process. The net of existence was slow. 3 or 4 years of manuscript work, you know, 25, 50 drafts to try to clarify, to try to get to something that's simple enough that we can use, something simple enough as a circle. So there wasn't any lightning, there wasn't any revelations, it was just sort of using, you know, one foot in front of the other foot, in front of the other foot, and eventually that, hey, you know, this is something that's, you know, that's really helpful. People can use that, you know. So that's the story, and Carol and I have been on this path, you know, for quite a number of years, and you know, giving gratitude to all you folks. The greatest gratitude is to my wife Carolyn, who not only has been my support, but has been a co-equal and very, very responsible for every single step. I'm just pushed out in front, but Carolyn's spiritual base, her love of human beings, and her outgoingness, and support is why I'm here, and it's this is sort of a blessing, and to share this. So. So we were on questions.
So when I'm working with clients, the majority of the time I find that they, probably 8 or 9 times out of 10, they experience the shift. And every once in a while I'll have someone that seems to be very logical when it comes to trying to find out the process before the process has gone through. I recognize that amplifies my identity system, so I work to relieve that and allow for the process for me and what this client's going through. But I wanted to hear your thoughts on when someone's really trying to, in their identity system, they are trying to figure out mind-body bridging in the first map before we even get to bridging or into the second. And it seems to be, I don't know, there's a part of me that wants to stop and help it with the fixer and talk to them and say, like, this is what we're doing and this is how we're doing it. But I'm wondering if you've run into people that are very logical in it, and what you do to help them experience the process when they start to get really, really irritated with you because they don't understand what's happening.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to do the two-part map and saying, hey, let's do something. It's okay if we do a two-part map, or usually most of our work, as I say, is done in groups, or everyone's in a group. So as long as they do something, as long as they're doing something that basically I don't explain, that's something very, very interesting that I had sort of really a lack of trust in MBB. So very, very early on, so I would have to explain the rationale and why we do this and how we do that and what it all means. But right, bang, even people would talk to me about things no matter who they were. Sometimes I just do a map over the telephone with them, a two-part map. Obviously, they need to agree. But I wouldn't explain. I would just say, hey, what you do, let's do this. We're just going to draw an oval, put an issue that's troubling you. And I usually, unless they are severe traumatic victims, I would put, well, what's most troubling to you? What's the issue that's really most troubling, or the decision? And just put it in, scatter your thoughts, body tension, mind clutter. The second map, do it. Just see it. Don't explain anything. Get their permission to, hey, this is what we're going to do, and do it. Then, in the second map, they can say, oh, I didn't feel anything, I didn't do this. And so you explain what's on the first map, then you explain what's on the second map, and just, you always have what Don did is just point out, hey, this is identity system. The issue that comes up quite a bit is when people have difficulties coming to their senses, okay? And one of the reasons that if they've been traumatized, and most of our patients have been traumatized, and pretty much all the addiction patients that you had have been traumatized. So in that particular case, the people want to sort of get numbed out. That they don't want to be in the present moment. They want to be someplace else because the present moment causes a lot of pain. And yet, if they're somewhere else, even if they're visualizing being in Hawaii or being on a mountaintop, that unless their identity system is resting, their healing is going to be delayed, you see. So they're not going to be able to heal from the trauma. So basically, even if you visualize positive stuff, that you're still pouring salt on the wound. So, I usually say, hey, they say, well, no, I never pay attention. This guy says, I never pay attention to what I'm feeling. And I said, well, what do you do for your time? I says, and he says, oh, I hunt. I says, well, tell me about that. He says, well, I'm in the woods and I'm really listening and I'm hearing every sound, every step. So he can use his awareness practices. Or, I never feel anything. I'm always numb, but I really like cars. And the guy says, I says, well, how about when you're tuning things up? And these were the old vehicles. And he said, oh yeah, I feel the screwdriver and I just listen. So, basically, the analogy is that the eye system puts a muff on your ears, you see. The sounds are already there, you see. You don't have to go to the sounds are there. It's just what is preventing the person from hearing the sounds, you see. It isn't that the world isn't there, but they're cut off. They're cut off from the sounds. They're cut off from their relationships. And if we look at the ball, we could just see that this could represent sounds and sights. This could be others, but they're sort of fixed. So that's the challenge, and you just sort of work with people. There's one football player a long time ago that I worked with him, and he was totally refractory to any of his senses. He was just numb. They just bang and bang and bang against each other, and it would be fun. But he really wasn't able to come to his senses. So we just continued the maps. And then when it came to the depressor map, and we talked about thoughts just being a secretion of the brain. Thoughts are just mind facts. Some positive, some negative. And then he said, that's right, my thoughts can cause me to kill people. And he came in because of his road rage, He was mandated for treatment because he had just beat up people. It wasn't enough to stop them and kick their car, but he'd punch them out, you see. And so he then he started working with his thoughts, and then as he put those in perspective, that he was able to thought label, and then it just opened up his whole MBB practice. But one just has patience, not outcome dependent, and just be sort of open to the kinds of outcomes that we may get. One thing that is very, very critical that I think many of us have mentioned, that the awareness practices does not change the counterproductive nature of the eye system, okay? The awareness practices in and of themselves will not change the counterproductive nature of the eye system. So basically, if all you give a client is the awareness practices, you're still on step one. They will fail because of all the requirements, all the power, and the awareness practices won't work, and they'll then badmouth mind-body bridging, okay? So this is a danger, that it isn't a cure-all, that it's to give people a taste of what natural functioning is about. That second map is to give people a taste of two mind, body, spiritual states. State one, I-system driven. State two, natural functioning. That's all the two-part map is about. And continuing to think that the awareness practices is going to get you home. It won't get you home, meaning the complete enchilada. So that is very important that people, take to it. It's exciting, it's fun, wow, look at this change, but it's going to fail. It's absolutely going to fail. You and I know it's going to fail, and it's important that you make this clear. You see? If you just use this part and anything else, that, you're saying, well, okay, emotional regulations, it helps, but it isn't the whole enchilada. It's just a little part of the overall picture. So, here's why it's part of the overall picture. We see this brain functioning here, that basically this part, the default mode network, hijacks. So on the first map, you just see this hijacking right there. This is the first map, okay? So your awareness, you're numbed out to what you see and hear, and you're making all kinds of mistakes. So this is basically map one. It's when the default mode network, the salience network, and as you remember, the representational world. The representational world is in this psychosocial salience network, and it just gets control. The salience network, it's just like a baby crying. You have no choice. Your baby cries, and bang, you're right there. You have pain, and you're right there. This salience network, you think addicts have a choice. Well, if the default mode network is active, they have no choice, because basically it's the whole world. Their whole world is dependent upon this. Just if you have pain, the whole world is dependent on that moment, what you do with the pain. So this is I-system functioning, and we know that this is part of the whole executive network. So let's go to the first slide. So this is a second map. How do we get from this hijacking? Okay, well, we hear the sounds, okay? All this hijacking, we now hear the sounds. Maybe this other one. So we're starting to hear the sounds. We're starting to, see the ink go on the paper. We're starting to feel things, and our attention is sort of coming back. Attention isn't the bottom line. Consciousness isn't the bottom line. Dawn and I went to this consciousness conference, worldwide consciousness conference, where they think consciousness is the answer to everything. They're global consciousness, little consciousness, quantum consciousness, all sorts of consciousness. But anyways, so when you come to your senses, here it is. This is why it works, you see? This shows how it works. So we go back to the first one. Now, your eye system is going to be lit up again, but when you're teaching someone about thoughts, you're then learning what your eye system is. This is the executive network. This is your cortex. Now you're starting to think. You're starting to use cognitive abilities, okay? You're starting to think, hey, this is just a thought. This is really just a thought. It's a one, and people label thoughts. I did a group of victims of domestic violence, survivors of domestic violence. These women were really bad. They were on the street, some of them. It was really tragic. But they started labeling their thoughts. And they would label the thoughts, I'm going to the bathroom. You see, you don't need to label a thought. You only label a thought to prevent it from going in the upper loop. If your thoughts are natural functioning, labeling your thoughts is something added, you see. You only label a thought to prevent it from going up. But if you're natural functioning, you don't have to think that I'm doing the dishes, I'm having, you just do it. So you only label thoughts to prevent it from going up. And with these women, they were just preventing it. So thought labeling sort of slows down the storylines. They then are able to create some, your interventions are in the central control, and these interventions enter into here, right here, and where this is the only way you intervene, and they're labeling thoughts, and that just causes more harmony and balance, and then you can slip into this sort of lower loop. So all the practices are just to allow natural functioning, harmony and balance. You don't have to teach a stomach how to digest food. You don't have to teach your brain how to natural functioning. You know, even with a stroke, your brain will natural functioning. Yeah, it's natural functioning. Even with cancer, your body's got natural function because it optimizes what is at every moment. Natural functioning isn't characterized. It just optimizes what it is every moment, and it's combined with everything. It's, the woman that I told you about, the story that her last breath, she was laughing. Before that, she was smiling. That basically she realized the reality of her connection with all existence. You see? And that was the truth. And the truth will set you free. But even a thought, you see, labeling thoughts, that's saying the truth will set you free. That every time you label a thought that it's going to cause a depressing fixer, it sets you free because you move away from the content and it's just a thought, you see? But the content sort of causes the eye system to get disjointed in the brain and also everywhere else in the body. So do we have any questions about this, how it's related to the clinical practice, how it's related to therapy?
So my question is based on application and fidelity to the process in relation to clinical settings, group settings for treatment, for psychotherapy. So in your PTSD workbook, you have a 10-week session. You also have the addiction treatment, and you also have the one for anxiety. I have them, all of them. Mm-hmm. And I am currently using the PTSD where I work. And so my question is based on, is there research besides MBB in relation to what is the best timeline, providing the patient is applying the principles and is following the simple process of it? So they can focus their awareness is raised into the well-being rather than focus on the eye system. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay, that's a great question. The question is timeline. Well, what we decided very early on, those of us dozen, 18 of us who knew about MBB at the VA, the core group, that we wanted to see the benefits. When would the benefits of MBB come? So what is the temporal course of the benefits? And I thank you, the question is, I haven't really thought about bringing it up, but it's a critical question. So all of us agreed that very quickly the patients sleep better. Very, very, very quickly. And we all wanted to do 10 sessions, but if you think about 10 sessions in research, that's a humongous task. Get people 10 sessions and they miss sessions and so forth. So we focused on 2 sessions or 3 sessions and took objective measures. And we found that, yes, sleep early on, within days. And we did another research of general population down in Texas, that people would just use a program on the internet, and they got as strong a results, although it wasn't a randomized control trial. That's in the literature too. So that's why we focused on that. In fact, we got the evidence basis for NREP on this short program. But we found when we did 2 or 3 sessions that all sorts of other things, that people had less fatigue, they were less depressed, they had less PTSD symptoms. That is another study which Yoshi Nakamura is writing up. He got a $2.5 million grant. That is going to be a very exciting publication because it has to do with pain, traumatic brain injury, sleep. So basically we focused, it's really a short MBB, 2 or 3 sessions, but we focused on sleep because that's something objective, but it is a relationship to everything else. So some clinics basically use this short 2 or 3 sessions when clients first come in. So they first come in, they're given this, and they sleep better. And of course, sleep, we all know that before suicide, homicide, mental regressions, depression, I mean, sleep is one of the first symptoms, although it is in the DSM-5 and it won't be in the DSM-6 either. So, but it's a very short, what can one accomplish in this environment of managed care? Well, 2 or 3 sessions is very, very, very powerful in relieving the whole spectrum. It's trans-diagnostic, as it was pointed out that it's sort of by Derek, sort of a meta-system that is totally trans-diagnostic. So we have a lot of research there. And then we have on the other end of the spectrum at the House of Hope, again, women abused on the street and so forth, with addiction, PTSD, no parenting skills, the whole 9 yards. And we then did that, and that became evidence-based for a long session. But that was, I believe, something like 40 hours. So here we're going from our research for 2 or 3 sessions, which is 4 to 6 hours, to something 40 hours. So basically we took both ends of the spectrum. And I know in physics we call them boundary value. We see what is going on at one end and then the other end, and then you can sort of extrapolate what's in the middle. Whereas if you ladder it, you never know what's on the other end. So 40 hours is more than any managed care is going to allow, or any state system or government system is ever going to allow. Because the good old days, we used to do psychoanalysis 5 times a week for 5 years, you see? That's very nice. You know, some insurance companies actually covered that then. I had some patients from, that had good insurance companies, and it covered this. It's not $1 million treatment, but it's a lot of money. But anyway, so the question is, you know, the temporal course. So basically, I've done some work with pain patients. Dawn's done some work with pain patients. Helly in Finland has done some work with pain patients. But that takes a long time too. But the results are very, very, very amazing. That people talk about pain, and then a few weeks later they talk about sensations in their arm, how first, you know, the pain moves around, and then they're just sensations. And then the pain nodes that are palpable by, you know, physiologists, and they get smaller and smaller, by, you know, objectively. So it takes a period of time. So basically, you know, anxiety, stress, all those symptoms, you just sort of see how the patient individually or in their group is reacting. And we all know that therapies should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, if you're doing 2 sessions, it's not a lot. But you know, if you're doing more, then basically the goal is, as I look at it, is can the patient have an MBB practice without coming to therapy? Is it good for them to come back every month to review? Is it good to have a group of patients from? It doesn't make any difference whether they're addicts, and we showed this with Joe, that if they're addicts, if they're psychiatric patients, if they're depressed, they come back to an MBB group. You can have a generic group because it's transdiagnosis, and all the support groups are just to reinforce that you have your focus on teaching about I-system application, about the I-system model. So I don't know if this answers your question, but it sort of gives an overview. But how much time do you have? And you know that you want people to get a personal MBB practice. And in all the workbooks, there is this bridging practice. How many times do you come to your senses? How many times do you recognize requirements? And that is, we have some light research, but I think that's something we would like to really get some firm research on, that this bridging scale determines outcome. And I don't believe there's any other modality that you can predict outcome. Patients can come to a group and they can agree with you and say this and say that and say my relationships are better and everything else. But here, if you can really look at that, that determines outcome. It's pretty remarkable. I know the state of Washington got into trouble when they committed people, once their sentence was over, for people who, pedophiles and the like, that they would then have a civil commitment, okay? So they served their jail sentence, but they felt that, hey, there's still a danger to the kids, so they didn't have they use a civil commitment, you know. And so then they put them there, and they wanted to keep them there indefinitely, but obviously the attorneys are going to find a loophole that depriving of the rights. So there was no way they could show that they were improving in therapy. So all they did is, if you went to so many sessions of this, so many sessions of that, and so many sessions of the other thing, and they went out into the community and they continued to pursue criminal activity. But with MBB, if we would implement MBB, you know, you can sort of tell if people are diffusing the requirements. You know if they can rest their eye system. That basically, if your eye system is resting, and you can use that to judge outcomes, which is, I think, pretty remarkable. But we've got maybe 5 minutes, a little more. Do we have other questions about therapy, applications? Well, let's run through. So the two-loop diagram, we know that the central control is the key. That obviously all these are thoughts, but this is where we intervene, and this is the central control that's connected to all the other loops. You see, connected to their body, connected to the universe. So that's where it is, and you know this loop, and you know this loop. Any other thoughts? Yes.
So I just had a question about the workbooks in conjunction with therapy. If you have any guidance about how to combine them using the workbooks along with their own personal mapping practice, or maybe maps that, you know, I come up with as their therapist that are important for them to do. Do you have any kind of direction about how to integrate that?
Okay, so that's another question which you haven't addressed. The PTSD workbook is different from all the other workbooks because it gives homework assignments every day. And this is quite useful, that there are people from all over the world that have no therapist that are able to go through that workbook and find tremendous relief from even complex PTSD. They were able to do this on their own. So the workbooks are designed both to be shown how we can use this in therapy, but it's also self-help, that people can use these workbooks and get very, very good outcomes. Some people, they just need help, you see. But the PTSD workbook shows every day, and the others that obviously someone that has stress isn't going to do an exercise every day, and the anxiety and the other workbooks, but that using the workbook and enabling a client to use the workbook is very, very, very important and very, very, very central to the whole task. That how one therapeutically integrates that into the treatment plan is up to you. But it brings up another question, that we have a 3-session client workbook that we've developed that we're going to be publishing in a guide. And the guide would be for the clinician. So we're working on a clinician's guide to supplement the workbooks. But what's important is to know that the first number of maps, and we have limited the number of maps to less than a handful, is to teach the concepts of MBB. However, once the patient knows the concepts, then you just use one map. It's sort of confusing to have so many different maps. But we do the different maps to demonstrate the concepts. But once the client knows a concept, there needs to be only one map. In fact, as someone has pointed out, that you don't have to do the second map. The most important thing is map 1. That, on the depressor map, never do I do the second map. I never ask people to come to their senses. Why? Because I want them to learn this is a separate tool. You don't have to do the awareness practices, but you just look at one of your thoughts that causes all this body tension. Label that thought. Wow. You know, I'm having a thought, I'm stupid. I'm having the thought, I'm stupid. You see? And that tension goes down. So basically, don't fall in love with the second map. You don't need the second map. It's only to demonstrate. It's only to demonstrate these two, to give someone a taste. The first map is absolutely critical to recognize the requirement. Then you just have one map. You can occasionally do the second map, but the key is to recognize the requirements. And once you recognize the requirements, and you're able to diffuse it. What's the difference between recognizing requirements and diffusing it? Well, one, you recognize it on a map, which is really great, but the map isn't right here, right now. So basically, diffusing requirement is meaning the situation comes up again when someone lies to you, or the kid does this, or the spouse does that, and you don't melt down. That's when you diffuse a requirement. You recognize a requirement on the map, you recognize it. I've had some clients, they just recognize a requirement, but they don't diffuse it. This is my requirement, but, for instance, all these requirements, the person listens to all the requirements, does it make sense that the world is going to be this way? Does it make sense that, your spouse is going to do this, or the kids are always going to do this, or the other? Does it make sense? And then what means they're using this frontal parietal nerve, they're using the executive system to work on it. Does it make sense that they recognize that it's their picture of reality in the representational world is distorted? Okay? So basically, the requirements is sort of a recognizing these requirements, and then the key is when Johnny does this, or when I make a mistake, am I going to melt down? Or when someone gets angry at me, am I going to melt down? The requirements say, well, he shouldn't get angry, or she shouldn't spend so much money, or whatever it is. So basically, there's more than the awareness practices, but if you are able to recognize your and it doesn't make sense, then you're cleaning up your representational world. And as you clean up your representational world, that your life changes dramatically. The future of humankind is orchestrated by the net. And we all know we're not victims. You see, we're participating in this. We're actively in it. And if we're actively in it, we can absolutely change it. We can change it by our actions, or we automatically change the course of humankind in a non-dual fashion by resting our identity system. That when you're sweeping the floor, if you're sweeping the floor with a resting identity system, you are actively participating in the course of humankind. And I thank all of you. I really appreciate your interest, and I'm looking forward to your futures as how you create, how you fulfill your mission of social workers, how you fulfill your mission as human beings. And I'm really grateful for all of you, and I thank you very much.